Presented this week at the annual meeting of the Radiological Society of North America in Chicago shows that playing violent video games measurably alters the regions of the brain associated with cognitive function and emotional control after just 1 week of game playing. For the study, healthy adult males, we're not even talking about children here, this was young people, men ranging in age from 18 to 29, who were not already avid video game players, were randomly assigned into 2 groups. Members of the first group were instructed to play a violent video game for 10 hours at home for a full week, and then for the following week not play the game, refrain from playing the game. The second group did not play a violent video game at all during the entire 2-week period. It's completed an emotional interference task, pressing buttons according to the color of visually presented words. Words indicating violent actions were mixed with nonviolent action words. The participants also completed a counting task that measured their cognitive, thinking, and memory abilities. The results showed that after 1 week of violent video game playing, the video game group members showed significantly less activity during the emotional task in the left inferior frontal lobe, where we inhibit ourselves from doing or saying things we think are wrong, and also showed less activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which regulates everything from blood pressure to decision-making and understanding things during the counting task.
There is a certain vulnerable, small but significant group of kids who we really should be careful with the material that they see in films, but in particular the kind of gaming material they use. And that is the kids who have psychiatric disorders. So if you're more impulsive, if you are more anxious, if you tend to be more depressed, or if you tend to be more detached and distant from and have social limitations in your way that you engage with your peer group, those are kids who are going to be more likely to play video games more often, and therefore the more aggressive the video game, the more sensitive they are to that material. And parents are the key here. They're the key for that particular group, but they're also the key for kids in general. Parents' involvement should be significant, and we know it's important. Parents should know what their kids are gaming, they should know how much time that they're spending gaming, and most importantly, they should be monitoring it, so that if you have a young child, a parent is so important in their communications in helping a kid understand the difference between reality and fantasy.
Have actually shown increases in cognitive function after playing video games. One study in particular had participants play Super Mario 64 for 30 minutes a day over 2 months. Afterwards, the brains of these participants saw an increase of gray matter in areas associated with memory, strategic planning, and fine motor skills of the hands compared to those who had not played. These are particularly encouraging results for mental disorders which cause these brain regions to shrink, using video games as a therapy. Surprisingly, action games can also increase attention to detail. Video games can also be incredibly educational. And while you may not be playing some of your favorite games for this purpose, there are certainly many games that are used as effective teaching tools for both young and old. They may even help kids who suffer from dyslexia read more effectively. In a small study, dyslexic children who played regular video games ended up reading faster and more accurately, once again relating to improved attention skills. Meanwhile, other studies have found improvements in eyesight. Not only can they see smaller details more clearly, like tiny writing, but they have an easier time differentiating levels of gray. Very practiced action gamers were 58% better at perceiving fine differences in contrast, which is important as this is one of the first things to diminish with age. Even in the elderly, improved memory and focus is seen. More importantly, specially designed brain-teasing video games have been shown to slow the aging process of the brain by up to 7 years. This is because they are cognitively complex and require mental energy.
So let's take a look at this link between these recent teen killers and video games.
Violent video games increase aggressive behavior as much as lead exposure decreases children's IQ scores.
Where is the artistic value of shooting innocent victims.
They put guns in the hands of little kids and teach them how to kill.
He was trained to kill with Call of Duty and other video games.
Is it true that violent video games make people more violent? I'm a professor of economics at the University of Texas at Arlington, and a casual gamer. I'm also a parent of children who enjoy video games, and I was curious to find out if video games could cause them to harm others. So I did some research. I conducted 3 studies to investigate the link between real-world video game usage and actual crime or fighting. These studies used different methodologies and different data sources, and in all 3 cases, I found that more video game playing is actually associated with less real-life violence. That's right, less. A 100% increase in violent video game consumption led to a 1% statistically measurable decrease in violent crime. Okay, that's not a big decrease, but it undermines the claim that violent video games increase violence. So how could virtual violence decrease actual violence? One theory is catharsis, which is to say letting off steam. One might vent violent impulses through a video game rather than upon an actual person. Another theory has to do with time management. Even without a cathartic effect, every hour that people are sitting at home playing video games is an hour that they're not out on the streets getting into trouble. I'm not alone in my findings. Recently, other researchers have published findings that cast further doubt on the link between violent video games and actual violence. But all this means that, however well-intentioned the calls for restrictions on violent video games are, as a society, we would be censoring games based on a mistaken belief that they cause violence, and could actually be leaving Americans exposed to more real-life harm.
Number 1, video games are therapeutic for children with chronic illnesses. In a study put out last year by the University of Utah, kids diagnosed with illnesses like autism, depression, and Parkinson's showed vast improvements in resilience, empowerment, and fighting spirit after playing certain games. Researchers say that it's the neuronal mechanisms that activate positive emotions and the reward system. Not to mention, it helped their demeanor.
Number 2, video games improve preschoolers' motor skills. A study from Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia examined the development of 53 preschoolers and found that the ones who played interactive games had better object control motor skills. Now, if only those preschoolers could get anything else right.
Number 3, video games reduce stress and depression. A 2009 annual review of cybertherapy telemedicine found that gamers who suffered from mental health issues such as stress and depression were able to vent their aggression and stress by playing video games.
Well, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Coming in at number 4, video games provide pain relief. A game developed by the scientists at University of Washington used the good old distraction technique by making game players throw an endless supply of snowballs at various targets, and found a similar outcome with recovering soldiers.
5, video games can improve your vision. You know, for people suffering from cataracts. By playing first-person shooters like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty, visually impaired patients train their eyes to view things more sharply.
What are we at now? What are we at? Number 6. We're at number 6. How about how video games improve your decision-making skills due to the required fast reactions and split-second decisions of virtual life or death? Cognitive neuroscientists found that these games give players plenty of practice for the real world by letting them gather information and react accordingly.
Ooh. And finally, at number 7, video games keep you happy in old age. North Carolina State University found that senior citizens who played video games, even occasionally, had higher levels of happiness or well-being, and those that didn't were reported to be more negative, apparently.
American Psychological Association wanted to give video games a fair shake and study the positive effects of playing video games.
Straight from lead author Isabella Granick's mouth, she says important research has already been conducted for decades on the negative effects of gaming, including addiction, depression, and aggression. And we are certainly not suggesting that this should be ignored. However, to understand the impact of video games on children's and adolescents' development, a more balanced perspective is needed.
So she and her team put those negative findings on the back burner and searched for the silver lining, which was less just a line and more like an abundance of silvery tinsel strewn about the festive tree of gaming. Oh, Halo Night!
Positive effects ran rampant through their research, totes debunking scores of negative stereotypes associated with playing our fun boxes.
For instance, those of you who indulge in RPGs, like myself, or puzzle games, level up your problem-solving abilities. So it's like marathon Final Fantasy sessions are like grinding for your brain. In fact, grades improved for students the year after they immersed themselves in enchanted worlds of magic and might.
And it turns out you shooter lovers aren't just a bunch of uber-aggressive, hyper-violent apes with an appetite for death and destruction. Who knew? In actuality, these gun-toters are improving social skills while running virtual team-building exercises.
And they might even be capable of becoming the intellectual saviors of our future.
Or serial killers.
Either one. Depends on which study you're referencing. Shooters retain the ability to visualize 3D spatial environments, which results from frequenting and memorizing 3D spatial environments. Smart Study Lady said, this has critical implications for education and career development, as previous research has established the power of spatial skills for achievement in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Rapid fire, other good video game stuff.
Okay!
Playing video games boosts creativity.
This includes the violent video game variety.
Constantly dying and failing in video games builds resilience.
Gives you the ability to say F you to failure.
Games from console to PC to the finger-flicking smartphone variety make us happy.
They're like tiny life masseuses because they relax you and relieve anxiety and improve your mood.
Intelligent Lady Woman said, if playing video games simply makes people happier, this seems to be a fundamental emotional benefit to consider.
All good stuff. Again, the research suggests that we consider the bad with the good when it comes to video games, but man, that's a lot of good stuff.
A new study says that video games are totally harmless. About Grand Theft Auto 5 and other violent video games and their effects on our brains.
Yeah? How'd that go over for you?
Reaction was mixed, and understandably so, because it seems that every study that gives video games an academic high five, there is another one that shows that they can actually harm us. They either do or they don't cause ADHD. They do or they don't cause violent behavior or discipline problems, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of been hard actually to show a direct causal link between video games and any kind of positive or negative behavior. And that's probably because the truth is actually incredibly complex. Everything we do in life, I know, believe it or not, everything we do in life has good and bad effects. If you were to go run a marathon and get super buff, you'd probably have a lot of knee problems later in life.
That is the most hypothetical of all situations.
Yes, it really is.
A couple days ago, some findings were published as part of the UK Millennium Cohort study that seemed to be in the pro gaming camp. A lot of gaming outlets picked it up because the headline basically said 11,000 kids tested over 10 years show no negative effects from video games. But it is important to know that that was not actually a study that was just about video games.
Right, so the Millennial Cohort study is the survey following the lives of 19,000 children who were born in either 2000 or 2001. Every 3 years, they basically check in with the kids and their families. They collect a ton of data about pretty much every aspect of their lives. The study that was released this week by the University of Glasgow analyzed some data from the cohort study all about the effects of on-screen entertainment on children.
Okay, so that is TV and video games, and they studied them separately, which is not something that is usually done. And their conclusion was that watching TV for 3 hours or more every day at the age of 5 was connected to basic conduct and discipline issues in kids by the age of 7. But TV didn't seem to affect hyperactivity or inattention. There were no relationship or social issues, and video games didn't seem to affect the kids at all in any way negatively.
Yes, and the bad effects of TV were seen equally in boys and girls, which I think is really interesting because usually these kinds of studies lean more towards boys having more behavioral problems when it comes to watching TV.
That's true. Yay, video games!
Yay, girls!
Yay, girls being as messed up as boys!
I'll take it.
Yeah!
Yes. Hold on though, because studies based on surveys like this aren't always the most accurate, especially with a sample size this large.
Sure.
There could be other reasons why these behavioral issues are showing up. For instance, kids in the study played way fewer hours of video games than they did watching TV, and parents tend to be a little bit stricter about video games with their kids than they do with TV.
Gotcha. So parents thinking TV is less harmless than video games leads them to let their kids watch a ton of TV, and that becomes detrimental, but playing as many hours of video games could have had the same effect, or worse.
Right, yeah. If anything, it's just nice to know that TV and video games don't really seem to have a connection to ADHD or social issues, which are two of the big accusations that are always leveled at them.
Awesome. So, I can play video games then?
I feel like most of the damage has been done on you, so yeah, go for it.
Great! You know, we don't just play video games, though.
Yes, don't let these deep, rich